You never get a second chance to make a first impression. And that first impression, when you're playing the bass, is usually your sound. Before people listen to content or anything else, the first thing that's going to hit them is the sound that you're getting out of the instrument. So how can we make it better? Today we're going to give you some tips and tricks that don't involve the instrument at all for getting a better bass sound. Hey cats, welcome to Learn Jazz Bass with Matthew Rybicki. I'm Matthew Rybicki. There's a lot of things to say about sound. Today I want to talk about some tips and tricks that are going to help you just with the natural acoustic sound. Don't think about an amplifier, pickups, so on. We'll talk about that in another video. Today we're talking about getting that big bass sound. The next step I want to talk about has to do with listening. And when I say listening, I don't just mean passively seeing whatever comes across your way, but searching out that kind of sound that you want, the sound of a bass player that you like. Somebody like Rodney Whitaker or Reginald Veal, Ben Wolf, Paul Chambers, Ray Brown, Sam Jones. Many players have a wonderful sound that you can hear on recordings. Even better, if you can hear somebody with a great sound live, that's going to make a big difference towards you having an idea of what you want as you pursue a good sound. Put those sounds in your mind's eye, your mind's ear. Remember what you want to sound like so you have a goal that you're striving for. Many years ago, I was visiting a Jazz at Lincoln Center rehearsal, and Rodney Whitaker was the bass player for the big band. It was a very big rehearsal space, and I was at the back of the room. The big band was halfway or even further on the other side of the room, and I could feel Rodney Whitaker's bass notes against my chest. I could physically feel them. When I discovered that, I said, man, I have to change what I am doing. If this is possible, I've got to find a way to do it. So pursuing that sound that you hear, that sound that you like, will make a big difference as you go forward because you have a goal. Be sure to be listening a lot. Compare one bass player's sounds to another. Find what you like and really chase that as you practice. And spend devoted time to practicing sound. We'll talk about that later in the video. Another tip that you might not think about has to do with a part of your bass, and that is this, your end pin. Well, this isn't your end pin, this is my end pin of one of my basses, but nonetheless, this is the part on the bass that, of course, goes on the ground. Most end pins have this sort of rubber stop at the end, and many of them you can unscrew. And when you unscrew it, you'll find a very sharp, pointy, dangerous thing. When you are in a room, performing in a room that has a wooden floor, sticking this into the ground as you play is going to actually make you sound louder. Now, I do want to caution you, many venues don't like this very much, so use your judgment as to whether you can do this. But taking this rubber stopper off and using this sharp point right into the ground is going to help that bass sound be transferred into the ground and make you louder. Let's also talk about putting yourself in a corner. Nobody puts baby in a corner, but bass players love it. Let me tell you why. It may seem kind of obvious, but it can make a huge impact that when you are up against a solid wall, or especially a corner, the sound that you are creating with your instrument is going to be reflected back to you and the listeners and the other musicians. It's going to be louder. It's going to seem louder at least. And you're going to feel really comfortable because you can hear yourself better. So get to a space early, before a drummer hopefully, and claim that corner or that part of the wall for yourself. It's going to make a big difference in your acoustic sound. The next thing I want to talk about has to do with the setup of your instrument. And by setup, I mean what kind of strings are you using, how high are the strings, where's the sound post, and so on. A luthier is going to be able to help you out with some of this stuff, like the sound post. And a luthier, if you didn't know, is a professional that repairs, builds, restores stringed instruments. They will generally have to be the ones to deal with sound post issues, but there's certain things that are under your control, like how high the strings are off of your fingerboard. Generally speaking, the higher the strings are, the louder the sound from the instrument. There is a point of diminishing returns though. I want to warn you, if you put the strings too high, not only will they be unplayable, but you may actually choke the sound of the bass. It's different for every instrument and for every person, so you kind of have to do your own experiments. But keeping in mind that the strings have to be higher than you might think is helpful. Ray Brown, the master, talked about having the width of your pinky be under the strings. That's how high the string should be. Ron Carter talks about the width of a pencil, a number 2 pencil, which is about the same as for most people. But generally we're talking about having higher strings than you might think. And with this comes some discomfort. You really can't get away from it. I'm not encouraging you to hurt yourself by any means. Please don't. But there is some benefit in really exerting some energy in dealing with the discomfort of playing higher strings. You're going to get a bigger, better sound. Again, don't limit yourself so that you can't play at all, but do experiment with higher strings to get a better sound. Additionally, I talked about the sound post. The position of the sound post, which is a dowel of wood essentially that connects the top and the back of the instrument, helps transfer the vibrations of the sounds through the instrument. The position of that can make a huge difference in the sound. It can affect the timbre, so how warm or bright the sound is, but can also affect how loud it is. Again, there's points of diminishing return here. There's sometimes not much you can do, but a luthier will be able to help you out and experiment with where can I put the sound post to get a bigger sound. The other thing is a very deep subject, deep meaning lots of people talk about it a lot, and it's sort of a never-ending struggle for most of us, and that has to do with strings. We'll do another video that has to do with strings specifically at another time, but keep in mind that the kind of strings that you choose will affect the sound that you hear, and that often has to do with how big a sound is or how loud it is. Typically, the standard strings that most people talk about are tomastic spirocores, the medium weight spirocores. That's sort of the default string for jazz players. They are very loud, and I have experience with that. I am using them again right now on my Upton bass. And in many experiments over the years, I've tried many different kinds of strings. And one thing I learned firsthand is that oftentimes the type of string will give the effect of being louder, even if it's not formally louder on, say, a decibel meter. Certain kind of strings have a sort of mid-range profile, so to speak, that can really cut through the other instruments, and so you can be heard and perceived as being louder. Gut strings, for example, can work like this. You can really be able to very clearly hear them through other instruments like drums in certain circumstances. Then again, it has to do with your particular way of playing and your particular bass. So there's many things to say about this, and as I say, we'll talk about it in another video. But keep in mind that strings are part of your setup and important for getting that big sound. Another thing I want to talk about has to do with how you're practicing and what you're thinking of when you're practicing. What I mean by that is, if you imagine that the sound that you're creating is going out beyond the space you're practicing in, this can have an impact on the actual volume that comes out. Just the thought of it can make a difference. Your body will adjust to trying to recreate a bigger sound. Specifically, what I'm talking about is sending that sound, sort of, I put air quotes there, sending that sound much beyond your physical space. If you're in a theater, send that sound to the back of a room. If you're in a practice room, send your sound through the walls, through the ceiling and the floor and so on. Imagine that it's going further. You know, bass waves are actually very big. They're like 7 feet tall and 27 feet long or something before the low E string actually makes its full cycle. They're huge. And so they do naturally go pretty far. But you can push that even more by sort of imagining, again, that you are sending it out, sending it far. To that end, one way you can sort of practically work on this is to do the inverse or converse, whatever it is, of what I was talking about with being against a wall. And that is to practice outside, as strange as it might sound. The idea is you've got nothing reflecting sound back to you, and so you have to be in total control of the sound that you're producing. And when you're thinking about making a big sound, you need to do everything with your hands that you can to make that sound because nothing is helping you. There are no walls to help you. So as sort of unconventional as it might seem, it can actually make a big impact if you practice outside, or at least practice where there's not walls close by. It's really going to help. I recommend it. The last thing I want to talk about today has to do with clarity of intention. When you're talking about something with your friends that you're very passionate about and you know a lot about, you speak very confidently and you're generally very clear on what you want to say. That same thing applies to playing music. When we are playing our bass, if we're very confident in what we're playing, at least confident in what we're trying to play, and play it in a strong way, that is also going to affect the way the sound of our instrument is perceived. So when you're very, very clear on playing this bass line, and I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know exactly which notes I'm playing, and I know exactly where I'm going, that is really going to come across much more effectively than if you feel unsure about what you're doing. That's actually going to affect your sound. Perhaps it's subconscious, probably so, but nonetheless, if you work on being strong and confident and sort of having that riz, for lack of a better word, having that swagger while you play, it's really going to help in your overall sound. So thanks for joining me today for this first part in talking about bass sounds. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to hear more about playing jazz bass. And always remember, straight ahead and strive for tone.